The dust from the stagecoach settled around Thomas Whitfield's boots as he stood outside the Laredo, Texas general store, his pockets empty except for a single silver dollar that represented everything he had left in this world. It was May 1878, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Laredo, a border town that sat along the Rio Grande where Texas met Mexico. Thomas had just spent the last of his earnings on feed for his horse, Shadow, which left him with only that single coin. He had come to town hoping to find work at one of the ranches nearby, but every foreman he spoke to said the same thing. They were not hiring until after the summer drought passed. His last job had ended 3 weeks ago when the ranch he worked on was sold to new owners who brought their own crew. At 25 years old, Thomas had spent his entire adult life working cattle, mending fences and breaking horses, but none of that mattered when there was no work to be found. He ran his calloused hand through his sandy brown hair and adjusted the worn leather hat on his head, contemplating his next move. The silver dollar in his pocket felt heavy with possibility. He could buy himself a hot meal, something he had not had in 2 days, or he could save it and make do with the jerky in his saddlebag for another day or two. His stomach growled at the thought of real food, but his practical nature told him to wait. As he stood there weighing his options, he heard a commotion from across the street. A woman's voice rose above the general murmur of town activity, pleading with someone. Thomas turned to see a young woman standing outside the boarding house, her face flushed with distress as she spoke to the stern-looking proprietor, Mrs. Henderson, who everyone in Laredo knew had a heart as hard as the Texas soil in August. The woman appeared to be around 22 or 23 years old, with auburn hair pulled back in a simple bun, wisps of it escaping around her face. She wore a plain cotton dress that had seen better days, the hem dusty and torn in places. Even from across the street, Thomas could see the desperation in her posture, the way her hands clutched a small cloth bag to her chest. "I told you, Miss Vaughn, I run a respectable establishment," Mrs. Henderson's voice carried across the street. "You pay in advance or you find somewhere else to stay. Those are the rules, no exceptions. Please, I just need one more day," the young woman said, her voice breaking slightly. "I am expecting money from my aunt in San Antonio. The stage should arrive tomorrow morning with her letter. I have been waiting for work at the dress shop, but Mrs. Martinez said she would not know until next week if she could afford to hire me." "That is not my concern," Mrs. Henderson replied coldly. "You have been here 3 nights already, and you have paid for none of them. I was charitable thinking you were good for it, but my charity has run out. You gather your things and be out within the hour." Thomas watched as the young woman's shoulders sagged in defeat. She nodded slowly and turned to go back inside the boarding house. Something about the scene stirred something deep in Thomas's chest. He had been in difficult situations before, had known hunger and uncertainty, but he had always been able to work his way out of trouble. He had his horse, his saddle, and his skills. This woman seemed to have nothing but hope, and even that was being stripped away from her. Before he could talk himself out of it, Thomas found himself walking across the street, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. He reached Mrs. Henderson just as she was about to follow the young woman inside. "Excuse me, madam," Thomas said, removing his hat respectfully. "I could not help but overhear. How much does the lady owe, Mrs.?" Henderson turned to him with suspicious eyes, taking in his worn clothing and the dust that covered him from the trail. $3 for 3 nights, plus one more in advance if she wants to stay another. $4 total. Thomas felt his heart sink. He had $1. But something about this situation would not let him walk away. He looked through the doorway and could see the young woman slowly climbing the stairs, her head bowed. "What if I pay for one night?" Thomas heard himself say. "Would that buy her some time, Mrs.?" Henderson's expression softened slightly, though her voice remained firm. "It would buy her tonight, but tomorrow morning, if she cannot pay, she will have to leave." Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out his silver dollar, the metal catching the sunlight. It was the last money he had. He had no prospects, no job, and no idea where his next meal would come from. But looking at that dollar, he realized something. He had options this woman did not have. He could sleep under the stars if he had to. He could hunt for food. He was young and strong and capable. This woman, alone in a border town with no money and no connections, was in real danger. The world was not kind to women without resources or protection. He placed the dollar in Mrs. Henderson's outstretched palm. "For tonight," he said quietly, "Mrs." Henderson looked at him with something that might have been respect, then nodded. "I will tell her. Who should I say paid?" "Just tell her a friend," Thomas said, replacing his hat on his head. He turned to leave, but Mrs. Henderson called out to him, "You should tell her yourself. She is entitled to know who helped her." Thomas hesitated, then nodded. Mrs. Henderson went to the base of the stairs and called up, "Miss Vaughn, could you come down here for a moment?" Thomas heard light footsteps on the stairs, and then the young woman appeared. Up close, he could see that her eyes were a striking green, though they were red-rimmed from holding back tears. She looked at him with confusion, then at Mrs. Henderson. "This gentleman has paid for your room tonight," Mrs. Henderson said, her tone slightly warmer than before. "You have until tomorrow morning to settle the rest of your account." The young woman's eyes widened, and she looked at Thomas as if trying to understand what she was hearing. "I do not understand. Why would you do that?" "Seemed like you needed help," Thomas said simply, feeling suddenly awkward under her intense gaze. "It is just one night, but maybe it will give you time to figure things out." She stared at him for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face as if trying to determine if this was some kind of trick. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "That was very kind, but I cannot accept charity from a stranger. I have nothing to repay you with." "I am not asking for repayment," Thomas said. "Consider it a bit of good luck in a place that does not seem to have much of it." She looked down at the cloth bag she still clutched, then back up at him. He could see her wrestling with pride and necessity, two forces that often fought each other in hard times. Finally, she took a deep breath and met his eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "I truly do not know what to say. This is the kindest thing anyone has done for me in a very long time." Thomas felt heat creep up his neck and was grateful for the shade his hat brim provided. "It is nothing. I hope your luck turns around soon." He tipped his hat to both women and turned to leave, but the young woman called out, "Wait, please. I did not even get your name." "Thomas Whitfield," he said, pausing at the door. "I am Eleanor Vaughn," she said, and despite her obvious distress, she managed a small smile. "Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. I will not forget this kindness." Thomas nodded and stepped out into the afternoon heat, feeling strangely lighter despite having just given away his last dollar. As he walked back to where he had left Shadow tied to the hitching post outside the general store, he tried to figure out what he was going to do next. He had no money, no job, and now no immediate prospects for either. But he had done the right thing, and that had to count for something. He was untying Shadow's reins when he heard quick footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw Eleanor Vaughn hurrying toward him, her skirts kicking up dust. "Mr. Whitfield, please wait," she called out. He turned fully to face her, noting how the sun caught the red highlights in her hair. She stopped a few feet from him, slightly out of breath. "I know you said you did not want repayment, but I cannot just let you walk away." she said, her words coming quickly. "That money you gave Mrs. Henderson, it was all you had, was it not?" Thomas considered lying, but something about her direct gaze made it difficult. "That is not your concern, Miss Vaughn." "So it was," she said, her eyes filling with tears again. "You gave me your last dollar." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she brought a hand to her mouth. "Why would you do that for me? You do not even know me." The tears that had been threatening now spilled over, running down her cheeks. Thomas felt a wave of panic. He had never been good with crying women, especially beautiful ones with green eyes that seemed to look straight through him. "Please do not cry," he said helplessly. "It is just money. I will figure something out." "Just money," she repeated, wiping at her cheeks with the back of her hand. "It was everything you had, and you gave it to a complete stranger. I do not understand people like you. Where I come from, people do not help each other without expecting something in return." "Where are you from?" Thomas asked, partly out of genuine curiosity and partly to distract her from crying. "St. Louis originally," she said, taking a shaky breath to compose herself. "But I have been moving around since my parents died last year. I came to Texas because I have an aunt in San Antonio who said she might be able to help me find work. I was on my way there when I stopped in Laredo and my money was stolen at the stage depot." "Stolen?" Thomas felt a flash of anger. "Did you report it to the sheriff? What good would that do?" Eleanor said bitterly. "The man who took it was long gone before I even realized my bag had been cut open. Sheriff Daniels said there was nothing he could do. So here I am, stuck in a town where I know no one, with no money and no prospects. I sent a telegram to my aunt 3 days ago, but I have not heard back. I do not even know if she received it." Thomas studied her for a moment. She was clearly educated, her speech precise and proper in a way that marked her as someone who had once had better circumstances. He wondered what series of misfortunes had led her to this desperate situation. "Have you eaten today?" he found himself asking. She looked startled by the question, then shook her head. "I had some bread yesterday morning that Mrs. Henderson gave me. She is not as harsh as she seems. She has just been taken advantage of too many times." "Come on," Thomas said, making a decision he knew was probably foolish but felt right anyway. "There is a cantina down the street. The owner, Mr. Garcia, sometimes gives me work mucking out his stables. Maybe I can work out a trade for a meal for both of us." "I could not possibly," Eleanor started to protest, but her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl that made her cheeks flush red. "Seems like your stomach disagrees," Thomas said with a gentle smile. "Come on, Miss Vaughn. Let us see what we can arrange." Eleanor hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Thomas led Shadow by the reins as they walked down the dusty main street toward Garcia's cantina, Eleanor walking beside him. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the buildings. The cantina was a low, adobe building with a wooden porch that provided some shade from the relentless sun. The smell of cooking food drifted out through the open door, making Thomas's stomach remind him that he had not eaten properly in days. They tied Shadow to the hitching post outside, and Thomas guided Eleanor through the door. Inside, the cantina was dim and cooler than the street. A few patrons sat at rough wooden tables, nursing drinks and talking in low voices. Behind a makeshift bar, Carlos Garcia looked up from the glass he was wiping. "Thomas," Carlos said with a warm smile that crinkled the corners of his dark eyes, "I was wondering when you would come back around. Did you find work at the ranches?" "Not yet," Thomas admitted, removing his hat. "Actually, Carlos, I was hoping we could work out an arrangement. I am willing to work for meals." Carlos's eyes flicked to Eleanor and his expression became knowing. "For 2 meals, I take it." "If you have work that needs doing, yes, sir," Thomas said, Carlos seemed to consider this for a moment, then nodded. The stable needs mucking, and there is a fence out back that needs mending. Do that and I will feed you both, but the work comes first. That is fair, Thomas agreed. He turned to Eleanor. You can wait inside where it is cool. I will be done as quickly as I can. I can help, Eleanor said immediately. I am not going to sit idle while you work for my benefit. Miss Vaughn, mucking out stables is not appropriate work for a lady, Thomas said, feeling uncomfortable with the idea. Eleanor's green eyes flashed with something that might have been anger or determination, possibly both. Mr. Whitfield, I appreciate your concern for propriety, but I stopped being a lady the moment my circumstances changed. I am a woman alone with no money and no prospects. Pride is a luxury I can no longer afford. If there is work to be done, I will do my share. Carlos watched this exchange with interest, then interjected. The fence work could use an extra pair of hands to hold the posts steady while Thomas hammers. And afterward, if the lady wishes, my wife could use help preparing vegetables in the kitchen. Maria's hands ache something terrible these days. Eleanor turned her determined gaze on Carlos. I would be happy to help in the kitchen, and I can hold fence posts. Thomas wanted to argue but recognized the stubborn set to her jaw. He had seen that look on his mother's face enough times to know when a woman had made up her mind. All right, he conceded, but if it gets to be too much, you will say something. I will be fine, Eleanor assured him. They followed Carlos through the cantina and out the back door, where a section of wooden fence had partially collapsed. The stable stood nearby, and Thomas could already smell the work that awaited him there. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work while Eleanor watched, clearly trying to figure out how she could help. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of physical labor. Thomas mucked out the stable with practiced efficiency, his muscles falling into the familiar rhythm of the work. Eleanor helped by hauling away the soiled hay in a smaller bucket, insisting she could manage despite Thomas's protests. He found himself watching her when he thought she was not looking, impressed by her determination. She never complained, even though he could see the work was hard on her. Her dress became even more stained and sweat dampened her hair, but she kept going. After the stable was clean, they moved to the fence. Thomas pulled out the broken posts and set new ones while Eleanor held them steady, her small hands gripping the wood firmly as he hammered them into place. They worked mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable quiet, broken only by the sound of his hammer and their breathing. Where did you learn to do all this? Eleanor asked as he secured the last post. Grew up on a ranch outside of Austin, Thomas said, wiping sweat from his brow with his sleeve. Been working with my hands since I was old enough to hold a hammer. My father was a ranch foreman before he died. He taught me everything about horses and cattle and fence mending. Do you miss it? Your home, I mean, she asked softly. Sometimes, Thomas admitted. But after my father died and my mother remarried, it did not feel like home anymore. My stepfather and I did not see eye to eye on much, so I left when I turned 18 and have been working ranches ever since. What about you? What was your life like in St. Louis? Eleanor's expression became distant, almost wistful. Different from this, she said. My father was a banker. We had a nice house and I went to a good school. I was supposed to marry well and live a comfortable life. But then yellow fever came through the city last summer. My parents both got sick within days of each other. They died within a week. I am sorry, Thomas said, meaning it. He knew the pain of losing a parent. After they died, I found out that my father had debts I did not know about. The bank took the house. Everything I thought was secure turned out to be built on credit and optimism. The man I was supposed to marry decided he was no longer interested once he learned I had no inheritance. So I wrote to my Aunt Clara in San Antonio, and she said she would help me. I sold what little I had left and bought a stage ticket to Texas, and now here I am. Your aunt will come through, Thomas said with more confidence than he felt. And until then, we will figure something out. Eleanor looked at him with those penetrating green eyes. Why do you keep saying we? You do not owe me anything, Mr. Whitfield. You have already done more than anyone could expect. Call me Thomas, he said. And I suppose I say we because it feels like the right thing to do. My mother always taught me that when God puts someone in your path who needs help, you help them. Simple as that. Before Eleanor could respond, Carlos appeared from the cantina. The work looks good, Thomas. Come inside and eat. Maria has prepared something special for you both. The meal that Maria Garcia set before them was simple but delicious. Beans, rice, fresh tortillas, and tender strips of beef that had been slow-cooked until they melted in the mouth. Thomas and Eleanor ate with the intensity of people who had not had a proper meal in too long. Maria, a plump woman with kind eyes and graying hair, watched them with maternal satisfaction. You need more meat on your bones, both of you, she declared, placing more tortillas on the table. Eat, eat. This is wonderful, Mrs. Garcia, Eleanor said between bites. Thank you so much. Carlos told me what you did, Maria said to Thomas, her English heavily accented but clear. Giving your last dollar to help this girl. That is a good heart you have. My Carlos, he is the same way, always helping people even when we do not have much ourselves. Thomas felt his face heat with embarrassment. It was not anything special. It was everything to me, Eleanor said quietly, looking at him across the table. After they finished eating, Maria beckoned Eleanor into the kitchen. Come, child. You help me prepare vegetables for tomorrow, and I teach you to make proper tortillas. A woman should know how to make good tortillas. Eleanor glanced at Thomas, who nodded encouragingly. As she followed Maria into the kitchen, Carlos sat down across from Thomas with 2 cups of coffee. She is a good woman, Carlos said without preamble. You are smart to help her. I was not being smart, Thomas said. I was just doing what felt right. Carlos smiled knowingly. Sometimes those are the same thing, but now you have a problem, yes. You have no money and no job. And now you have a responsibility. She is not my responsibility, Thomas protested, but the words felt hollow even as he said them. Maybe not in the way you mean, Carlos agreed. But you made a choice to help her, and that creates a bond. She will not forget what you did. And I think you will not be able to walk away from her easily. Thomas sipped his coffee and said nothing because he suspected Carlos was right. In the space of a few hours, Eleanor Vaughn had somehow become important to him. He could not explain it rationally. Maybe it was the way she had not given up despite her circumstances. Maybe it was the determination he saw in her eyes when she insisted on helping with the work. Or maybe it was something simpler and more fundamental, a connection he felt when their eyes met that seemed to bypass all logic and go straight to something deeper. I need to find work, Thomas said, steering the conversation to practical matters. Do you know of anyone hiring? Carlos thought for a moment. The Dawson Ranch might need hands. The foreman, Jack Riley, he is a fair man. They are about 10 miles north of town. You could ride out there tomorrow morning. But Thomas, even if you find work, what will you do about the girl? Her name is Eleanor, Thomas said, feeling defensive on her behalf. And I suppose that depends on what she wants to do. If she can get word from her aunt, maybe she can continue on to San Antonio. And if she cannot, Carlos pressed. Thomas did not have an answer to that. From the kitchen, he could hear Eleanor's laughter mixing with Maria's, a light sound that seemed to brighten the dimming cantina. It was a nice sound, one that made him smile without thinking about it. I will figure something out, Thomas said finally. Carlos nodded as if this was the answer he expected. You can sleep in the stable tonight if you need a place. It is clean now and there is fresh hay. I will not charge you. I appreciate that, Thomas said gratefully. What about Eleanor? She has a room at the boarding house for tonight, but tomorrow. Maria and we have been talking, Carlos said, keeping his voice low. If the girl needs a place to stay, she can sleep in the storeroom here. It is small, but it is dry and safe. And if she is willing to help Maria with the cooking and cleaning, we can provide her meals and a place to sleep until she figures out her situation. Maria's hands, they are getting worse with the arthritis. She could use the help. Relief flooded through Thomas. That is incredibly generous, Carlos. Thank you. We help each other in this life, Carlos said with a shrug. That is how we survive. You help the girl, I help you both. Maybe someday you help someone else. That is how it works. When Eleanor emerged from the kitchen an hour later, her hands dusty with flour and her face flushed but smiling, Thomas stood to meet her. Mrs. Garcia taught me to make tortillas, she said, her eyes bright with accomplishment. Mine were not as round as hers, but she said they will taste just as good. Carlos and Maria have made us an offer, Thomas said. He explained the arrangement, watching Eleanor's face carefully for her reaction. Her smile faded into something more serious, and she turned to look at Carlos and Maria, who had followed her out of the kitchen. You would do that for me. Even though you do not know me, Thomas vouched for you, Maria said simply. That is enough for us. Besides, I can see you are a good girl who has had bad luck. We all need help sometimes. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they seemed to be tears of relief and gratitude rather than despair. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you both so much. I promise I will work hard and earn my keep. We know you will, Maria said warmly. Now it is getting late. Thomas will walk you back to the boarding house so you can rest properly in a real bed tonight. Tomorrow you can move your things here. As they walked back through the darkening streets of Laredo, Thomas leading Shadow and Eleanor walking beside him, the evening air had cooled considerably. The sky above them was turning deep purple, stars beginning to appear. The town was quieter now, most people having gone home for supper. I cannot believe how much my situation has changed in just a few hours, Eleanor said softly. This morning I was facing the prospect of sleeping in the street. Now I have a place to stay and work to do, all because you gave me your last dollar. It seems like things have a way of working out, Thomas said, though he was still not entirely sure how he was going to manage his own situation. He had a lead on possible work, but that was far from certain. They reached the boarding house, and Thomas walked Eleanor to the front door. In the lamplight spilling from the windows, he could see her face clearly. Despite the hard day, despite the dirt and the stains on her dress, she was beautiful. But more than that, there was something about her that drew him in, a strength beneath the vulnerability that he found himself wanting to know better. "Good night, Mr. Whitfield," she said formally, but there was a warmth in her voice that had not been there earlier. "Thomas," he reminded her. "And good night, Miss Vaughn." "Eleanor," she countered with a small smile. "I think after today we can use first names, do you not think, Eleanor?" he repeated, liking the way her name felt in his mouth. "Sleep well. I will come by in the morning to help you move your things to the cantina before I ride out to the Dawson Ranch. Be safe," she said, and then, impulsively, she reached out and touched his arm briefly. The contact was brief but electric, sending a warmth through him that had nothing to do with the residual heat of the day. "And thank you again. For everything." He watched her go inside, then led Shadow back toward Garcia's cantina. As he settled into the stable for the night, surrounded by the smell of fresh hay and the gentle sounds of Shadow settling down nearby, Thomas found his thoughts continually returning to Eleanor, to the way she had insisted on helping despite her obvious exhaustion, to her laughter in Maria's kitchen, to the brief touch of her hand on his arm. He barely knew her, but something had shifted inside him today, something that felt significant and a little frightening in its intensity. As he closed his eyes and tried to sleep, he found himself hoping that the Dawson Ranch would hire him, not just because he needed the work, but because it would give him a reason to stay in Laredo, to stay near Eleanor and see where this unexpected connection might lead. The next morning dawned clear and hot, promising another scorching day. Thomas was up early, watering Shadow and checking his tack before heading to the cantina's main room where Maria was already busy preparing breakfast. She fed him eggs and tortillas, refusing his offer to work for the meal. "You did the work yesterday," she said firmly. "Today you go find a job so you can take care of yourself, and maybe take care of that girl too if things work out the way I think they might." "I only just met her yesterday," Thomas protested. "So," Maria said with a knowing look, "sometimes that is all it takes. I knew Carlos was the man I would marry the first day I met him. My heart knew even before my head caught up." Thomas did not know what to say to that, so he focused on his breakfast. After eating, he walked to the boarding house to help Eleanor with her things. He found her waiting on the porch, her small cloth bag at her feet. She wore the same dress as yesterday, brushed clean as best as she could manage, and her hair was neatly pinned up. "Is that everything?" he asked, looking at the single bag. "I do not have much," she admitted. "A change of clothes, a few personal items. When I left St. Louis, I had to sell almost everything just to afford the stage fare." The simplicity of her statement, spoken without self-pity but with simple acceptance, touched something in Thomas. He picked up her bag and offered his arm. "Then let us get you settled at the cantina, and then I need to ride out to see about work." They walked back through the already warming streets of Laredo, and Thomas found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him. The way the morning sun caught the red in her hair, the light floral scent that somehow clung to her despite yesterday's hard work. The way she fit, perfectly tucked against his side as they walked. At the cantina, Maria fussed over Eleanor like a mother hen, showing her the small storeroom that had been cleared out for her use. It was not much, just a narrow space with a cot and a small table with a lamp, but it was private and safe. Eleanor seemed overwhelmed by the kindness, her eyes bright with unshed tears as she thanked Maria. "Now you stop with all this thanking," Maria said, patting Eleanor's cheek. "We are happy to have you. Today I will teach you my recipes, and you will help me cook. Tonight we will be busy with the supper crowd." Thomas lingered by the door, his hat in his hands. "I should get going if I want to make it to the Dawson Ranch and back before dark." Eleanor turned to him quickly. "Of course. I hope they have work for you, Thomas." "So do I," he said. Then, surprising himself, he added, "When I get back, maybe we could take a walk, if you are not too tired from helping Maria." Her face lit up with a smile that made his heart skip. "I would like that very much." As Thomas rode Shadow north out of Laredo, he found his mind split between the present task of finding work and thoughts of Eleanor. The landscape around him was harsh and beautiful in the way that Texas could be. Scrub, brush, and mesquite, rocky soil that challenged everything trying to grow in it. The sun climbed higher as he rode, and he was grateful for his hat and the canteen of water Carlos had insisted he take. The Dawson Ranch appeared in the distance after about 2 hours of riding, a sprawling operation with multiple buildings and extensive corrals. Cattle dotted the landscape, their brown and white hides stark against the pale dirt. Thomas rode up to the main house, a solid structure built from local stone and wood, and dismounted. A lean man with weathered skin and sharp eyes emerged from the barn. He wore a foreman's bearing and looked Thomas over with the practiced eye of someone who could assess a man's worth in seconds. "Help you?" the man asked, his voice rough but not unfriendly. "I am looking for Jack Riley," Thomas said. "I heard he might be hiring ranch hands." "You found him," the man said. "What is your experience?" Thomas laid out his work history, describing the ranches he had worked and the skills he had acquired. Riley listened without interruption, occasionally nodding. When Thomas finished, Riley was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking. "I might have a spot," Riley said finally. "One of my hands broke his leg last week, and he will not be back for months. The work is hard and the pay is fair. $30 a month plus meals and a bunk in the ranch house. You would be working with cattle mostly, mending fence, breaking horses when needed. 6 days a week with Sundays off." "Does that suit you?" "It suits me fine," Thomas said, relief flooding through him. $30 a month was decent pay. "When can you start?" Riley asked. Thomas hesitated. "Would tomorrow morning be acceptable? I have some business to settle in town today." Riley studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Tomorrow at dawn, do not be late." "I will be here," Thomas promised, shaking Riley's outstretched hand. The ride back to Laredo felt faster, buoyed by Thomas's good fortune. He had a job. He would have steady pay and a place to sleep. More importantly, the ranch was close enough that he could ride into town on Sundays. He could see Eleanor regularly and maybe, just maybe, they could explore whatever this connection was between them. When he arrived back at the cantina in the late afternoon, he found Eleanor in the kitchen with Maria, the two of them working together to prepare the evening meal. Eleanor's face was flushed from the heat of the stove, and she wore an apron over her dress. She looked up when he entered, and her face broke into a smile that made the long, hot ride worthwhile. "How did it go?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "I got the job," Thomas said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "I start tomorrow morning at the Dawson Ranch." "Oh, Thomas, that is wonderful," Eleanor exclaimed, and before either of them quite realized what was happening, she had crossed the kitchen and hugged him. It was brief, lasting only a moment before she seemed to realize what she had done and stepped back, her cheeks flushing even redder. "I am sorry, that was forward of me." "It is all right," Thomas said, wishing the hug had lasted longer. "I was pretty happy about it too." Maria watched this exchange with poorly concealed amusement. "So you will be leaving tomorrow? Then you too should take that walk you mentioned this morning. The sun will set soon and the evening will be cool. Eleanor has worked hard today. She deserves a rest. Go, both of you. The supper preparations can wait a few minutes." Eleanor looked at Thomas questioningly and he nodded. "If you are not too tired." "I am never too tired for a walk," she said. They left the cantina and wandered toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land. The sun was indeed beginning to set, painting the western sky in shades of orange and pink. They walked slowly, neither seeming to want to rush the moment. "I am glad you found work," Eleanor said after a while. "I was worried for you last night. It seemed wrong that you should suffer for helping me." "I am not suffering," Thomas said. "Things worked out for both of us. You have a place to stay and work to do. I have a job." A few days ago, neither of us could say that. "Do you believe in fate?" Eleanor asked suddenly. "That things happen for a reason," Thomas considered the question. "I am not sure. My father used to say that luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. But my mother believed everything happens according to God's plan. Maybe it is some of both." "I used to think I had my whole life planned out," Eleanor said softly. "I knew exactly what my future would look like. A good marriage, children, a comfortable life in St. Louis. But then everything fell apart and I had to question all of it. Now I do not know what to believe, except She trailed off, seeming uncertain. Except what? Thomas prompted gently. She stopped walking and turned to face him, the setting sun casting her face in warm light. Except that having my money stolen in Laredo and meeting you feels like maybe the worst thing that could have happened to me. Does that make any sense? Thomas felt his heart beating faster. It makes perfect sense. I feel the same way. When I gave you that $1 yesterday, I was not thinking about anything except that you needed help and I could provide it. But now, knowing you even this little bit, I cannot imagine not having met you. Eleanor smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes. We have only known each other a day and a half. It seems crazy to feel this way so quickly. Maybe, Thomas agreed. Or maybe sometimes you just know. Maria said she knew Carlos was the man she would marry the day she met him. Did she now? Eleanor said, amusement coloring her voice. And what do you know, Thomas Whitfield? It was a bold question, one that seemed to invite an equally bold answer. Thomas took a breath, deciding to be honest. I know that I want to get to know you better. I know that when I rode out to the Dawson Ranch this morning, I was hoping I would get the job not just because I need the work, but because it would mean I could stay near you. I know that I have not been able to stop thinking about you since yesterday. Eleanor's breath caught, and for a moment they just stood there, looking at each other in the fading light. I have been thinking about you too, she admitted quietly. About how you gave me your last $1 without hesitation, about how you insisted on working so I could eat. About how you made everything feel less frightening and more manageable. I have been alone for so long, Thomas. It is nice to feel like maybe I am not alone anymore. Thomas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hand. Her fingers were slender and warm in his calloused palm. You are not alone, he said firmly. Whatever happens, whatever comes next, you are not alone. They stood like that for a long moment, hands clasped, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Finally, reluctantly, Thomas said, I should walk you back before it gets full dark, and I need to get my gear ready for tomorrow. Riley wants me there at dawn. They walked back to the cantina slowly, still holding hands, neither wanting the moment to end. At the door they paused. When will I see you again? Eleanor asked. I have Sundays off, Thomas said. I will ride in every Sunday. Maybe we could spend the day together. I would like that, Eleanor said. She squeezed his hand once more before releasing it. Be safe, Thomas. Work hard and come back to me on Sunday. I will, he promised. You can count on it. Thomas spent that night again in the stable, but this time his thoughts were not troubled. Instead, he found himself looking forward to the future in a way he had not in a long time. He had work, which was good. But more than that, he had something to work toward, someone to come back to. Eleanor's face seemed to float in his mind as he drifted off to sleep, her green eyes and warm smile becoming the last things he thought about before sleep claimed him. The next morning, Thomas was up before dawn, preparing Shadow for the ride to the Dawson Ranch. He stopped by the cantina to say goodbye to Eleanor, but Maria told him she was still sleeping after the long day yesterday. It is better this way, Maria said wisely. Long goodbyes are hard. You go do your work and come back Sunday. She will be here waiting for you. Thomas wrote a quick note that Maria promised to give to Eleanor, then mounted Shadow and rode north as the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky. As he rode, he felt a strange mixture of excitement and anticipation. The next few days would be the longest of his life, he suspected, as he waited for Sunday to come so he could see Eleanor again. The work at the Dawson Ranch was exactly what Jack Riley had promised. Hard, demanding, and satisfying. Thomas fell into the routine quickly, his years of experience making the work feel familiar even in new surroundings. He mended fences under the brutal sun, helped round up stray cattle, and worked with the other ranch hands to keep the operation running smoothly. The other men were a mix of personalities. There was old Pete, who had been working ranches since before Thomas was born and had a story for every situation. Young Danny, barely 18, was eager and hardworking but still learning. Miguel and his brother Roberto were experienced hands from Mexico who spoke limited English but communicated perfectly when it came to working cattle. They were good men, all of them, and Thomas found himself fitting into their company easily. But no matter how tired he was at the end of each long day, his thoughts always drifted back to Eleanor. He wondered how she was doing, if Maria was treating her well, if she had heard from her aunt in San Antonio. Most of all, he wondered if she thought about him as much as he thought about her. The days until Sunday seemed to crawl by with agonizing slowness. Thomas worked hard, partly because it was his nature and partly because it helped pass the time. At night, lying in his bunk in the ranch house, he would pull out the memory of Eleanor's hand in his, her smile in the fading light, her words about not being alone anymore. Finally, mercifully, Sunday arrived. Thomas was up even earlier than usual, washing up and putting on his cleaner shirt. Danny noticed his preparations and teased him good-naturedly. "Must be a girl in town," Danny said with a knowing grin. "No man gets that cleaned up just to go drinking." "There might be," Thomas admitted, unable to keep from smiling. "Well, good luck to you," Danny said. "Pretty girls are scarce in these parts. If you found one, you better hold on to her." Thomas rode into Laredo with his heart beating faster than Shadow's hoofbeats. The town was quiet on Sunday morning, many people at church services. He rode straight to the cantina and found Eleanor sweeping the front porch. She looked up at the sound of hooves, and her face transformed with joy when she saw him. "Thomas," she called out, setting the broom aside. She hurried down the steps to meet him as he dismounted. "I was hoping you would come early." "I could not stay away," he said honestly. "How have you been?" "How is the work with Maria?" "It has been good," Eleanor said, her eyes bright. "Maria has been teaching me so much, not just cooking but about everything. She is like the mother I lost. And Carlos has been kind too, treating me like family. They are wonderful people." "Have you heard from your aunt?" Thomas asked as they walked Shadow to the water trough. Eleanor's expression became more subdued. "Not yet. But the stage from San Antonio only comes twice a week, and there have been delays. I am trying not to worry." Thomas wanted to erase the worry from her face. "Would you like to spend the day together? We could take a ride, maybe have a picnic. There is a spot a few miles from here where a creek runs through. It is pretty this time of year, even with the heat." "That sounds wonderful," Eleanor said. "Let me tell Maria where I am going and get my bonnet." 20 minutes later, they were riding out of town together, Eleanor seated in front of Thomas on Shadow. He had one arm around her waist to steady her, and he was intensely aware of every point where their bodies touched. She seemed to relax against him as they rode, trusting him to guide the horse and keep her safe. The creek Thomas had mentioned was indeed beautiful, a ribbon of water lined with cottonwood trees that provided blessed shade. The sound of running water was peaceful, and birds sang in the branches above them. Thomas had brought a blanket and some food that Maria had packed for them, including fresh tortillas, cheese, and fruit. They spread the blanket near the water and sat together, eating and talking. The conversation flowed easily between them, covering everything and nothing. Eleanor told him more about her life in St. Louis, about her parents and the dreams she had once had. Thomas shared stories about growing up on the ranch, about his father's wisdom and his mother's kindness. "Do you ever see your mother anymore?" Eleanor asked. "Not often," Thomas admitted. She lives in Austin with her new husband. We write occasionally, but it is not the same as it used to be. I think she feels guilty about remarrying so quickly after my father died, though she should not. She was lonely, and her new husband is a good man. He just is not my father, and I had a hard time accepting that. I understand that, Eleanor said softly. When my parents died, I was so angry. Angry at them for leaving me. Angry at God for taking them. Angry at the world for continuing as if nothing had changed. It felt impossible that life could just go on when everything I knew had been destroyed. Thomas reached out and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. I am sorry you had to go through that. No one should have to face that kind of loss alone. I am not alone anymore, Eleanor said, echoing his words from their first walk together. I have Maria and Carlos, and I have you. You do have me, Thomas confirmed. He hesitated, then decided to voice what had been on his mind all week. Eleanor, I know we have not known each other long, but this thing between us, it feels real to me, important. I want to court you properly if you will allow it. Eleanor's green eyes widened slightly. Court me. Thomas, I have nothing. No family nearby, no money, no prospects. You deserve someone who can bring something to a marriage besides debts and worn dresses. I do not care about any of that, Thomas said firmly. I care about you, about your strength and your determination. About the way you insisted on helping with the work even though you were exhausted. About your kindness and your smile. Those are the things that matter, Eleanor, not money or social standing. But what kind of wife could I be? Eleanor asked, and he could hear the fear beneath her words. I do not know how to survive in this place. I cannot cook like Maria or mend fences or any of the practical things a rancher's wife needs to know. Maria is teaching you to cook, Thomas pointed out. And the other things, I can teach you if you want to learn them. Or you can stay in town and help at the cantina. There is no rule that says you have to live on a ranch. Eleanor, I am not asking you to be something you are not. I am asking if you would consider letting me court you, to see where this connection between us might lead. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, staring at their joined hands. When she finally looked up at him, there were tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I would like that very much. You are the best man I have ever known, Thomas Whitfield. And somehow, despite all the terrible things that have happened, meeting you makes it all seem worthwhile. Thomas felt a wave of emotion so strong it nearly overwhelmed him. Without thinking, he leaned forward and kissed her gently. It was a brief kiss, chaste and sweet, but it felt like a promise. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. They spent the rest of the day by the creek, talking and laughing and enjoying each other's company. Thomas told her about the ranch and the men he worked with. Eleanor shared her dreams of maybe opening a small dress shop someday, using the skills she had learned as a girl. They talked about their hopes for the future, carefully building a shared vision of what their lives together might look like. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, they reluctantly packed up and rode back to Laredo. At the cantina, Thomas helped Eleanor down from the horse, his hands lingering on her waist. I will come back next Sunday, he said, and I will write you letters during the week. Carlos said he would make sure you get them. I will write you too, Eleanor promised, and I will count the days until I see you again. They kissed once more in the fading light, a longer kiss this time that spoke of growing feelings and future possibilities. Finally, Thomas mounted Shadow and rode back toward the Dawson Ranch, looking back several times to see Eleanor standing in front of the cantina, waving goodbye. The next weeks fell into a pattern. Thomas worked hard at the ranch during the week, earning the respect of Jack Riley and the friendship of his fellow ranch hands. Every Sunday, he rode into Laredo to spend the day with Eleanor. They would walk through town, have meals at the cantina, or ride out to their special spot by the creek. Each visit, their connection deepened. Each goodbye became harder. Eleanor thrived under Maria's guidance. She learned to cook authentic Mexican food, to make tortillas that were perfectly round, to season beans and rice until they sang with flavor. She helped serve customers in the cantina and proved to have a natural friendliness that made people feel welcome. Carlos began to joke that she was better for business than any advertising could be. But despite the happiness of their courtship, there was an unspoken worry that hung over them both. Eleanor still had not heard from her aunt in San Antonio. As the weeks passed with no word, it became increasingly clear that help was not coming from that direction. Eleanor tried not to show how much this worried her, but Thomas could see it in the tightness around her eyes, the way her smile sometimes did not quite reach her face. One Sunday in late July, nearly 2 months after they had met, Thomas arrived at the cantina to find Eleanor unusually quiet. Maria pulled him aside before he could talk to her. "She received a letter yesterday," Maria said quietly, "from a cousin in St. Louis. Her aunt in San Antonio died 3 weeks ago. That is why Eleanor never heard back from her." Thomas felt his heart sink. "Does she know?" "Yes. The letter came yesterday afternoon. She has been trying to be brave about it, but she cried most of last night. She is putting on a happy face today because she knew you were coming, but inside she is hurting." Thomas found Eleanor in the kitchen, preparing vegetables with mechanical precision. When she saw him, she tried to smile, but it crumbled almost immediately. "Maria told you," she said, not a question. "Come here," Thomas said, opening his arms. She went to him without hesitation, and he held her as she cried silent tears into his shirt. "I am so sorry, Eleanor. I know you were counting on your aunt." "I should have known it was too good to be true," Eleanor said bitterly. "Every time I think I have found solid ground, it falls away beneath me. My parents, my home, my fiancé, and now my aunt. Everyone I try to lean on disappears." "Not everyone," Thomas said firmly, tilting her face up to look at him. "I am not going anywhere, do you hear me? I am not leaving you." "You cannot promise that," Eleanor said. "Life does not work that way. People leave, Thomas. They die, or they find someone better, or circumstances change. You cannot promise you will always be here." "I can promise that I will do everything in my power to be here," Thomas said. "Eleanor, these past 2 months have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, spending time with you, watching you grow and thrive here. You are not alone in this world. You have Maria and Carlos who love you like a daughter. You have friends in this town, and you have me." Eleanor searched his face, and whatever she saw there seemed to steady her. She took a shaky breath and nodded. "I am sorry. I am just feeling overwhelmed today. Finding out about my aunt, it just reminded me how precarious everything is. I am living on the kindness of others with no real security of my own." Thomas had been thinking about this for weeks now, turning an idea over in his mind, examining it from every angle. Hearing Eleanor's pain and fear made his decision for him. "Marry me," he said. Eleanor's eyes went wide. "What? Marry me?" Thomas repeated, more confidently this time. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other 2 months, but I also know that I love you, Eleanor. I think I have loved you since that first day when you asked why I would give you my last dollar. Marry me. Let me give you the security you need. Let me be the person you can count on." "Thomas, I cannot ask you to do that," Eleanor said, even as her eyes filled with hope. "You should not marry someone out of pity or obligation." "Is that what you think this is?" Thomas asked. "Eleanor, I want to marry you because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to build a future with you. I want to have children with you someday and grow old together. Yes, I want to give you security, but not out of pity, out of love, because you deserve to feel safe and cared for, because making you happy makes me happy." Tears streamed down Eleanor's face, but she was smiling now. "You love me." "I love you," Thomas confirmed. "I should have said it before now. I love your strength and your determination. I love the way you laugh at Carlos's terrible jokes and the way you are endlessly patient with Maria's cooking lessons. I love how you insisted on helping even when you were exhausted. I love everything about you, Eleanor Vaughn, so will you marry me?" Eleanor threw her arms around his neck, nearly knocking him backward. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, yes. I love you too, Thomas. I have loved you for weeks but was afraid to say it." "Yes, I will marry you." Thomas lifted her off her feet and spun her around, both of them laughing with joy and relief. When he set her down, he kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and commitment into it. From the doorway, they heard Maria let out a whoop of joy. "Finally!" Maria exclaimed, bustling into the kitchen. "Carlos, Carlos, come quickly." Thomas finally asked her. Carlos appeared with a huge grin on his face. "About time, my friend. We have been wondering when you would get around to it." "You knew I was going to ask," Thomas said, surprised. "We are old, not blind," Carlos said with a laugh. "Anyone could see how you two felt about each other, but it is good that you made it official." "When is the wedding?" Thomas looked at Eleanor. "As soon as possible," he suggested. "Next Sunday," Eleanor said decisively. "I do not want to wait." "Is that too soon?" "Next Sunday is perfect," Thomas said. The following week was a whirlwind of activity. Maria helped Eleanor make a simple but beautiful dress from fabric that Carlos insisted on buying for her. The women of Laredo, who had come to know and like Eleanor during her time working at the cantina, contributed what they could. Lace for the dress, ribbons for her hair, flowers for a bouquet. Thomas worked his regular week at the ranch, but told Jack Riley about his upcoming marriage. Riley surprised him by offering Thomas and Eleanor the use of a small cabin on the ranch property. "It is not much," Riley said. "Just 2 rooms and a kitchen. But it is yours if you want it. I would rather have you close by, and it would be better for a married couple than the bunkhouse." Thomas accepted gratefully. He spent his free hours that week cleaning the cabin and making it as comfortable as possible. The other ranch hands helped him repair the roof and fix the windows. Miguel's wife donated an old but serviceable table and chairs. By Saturday evening, the cabin was modest but livable, ready to become a home. Sunday morning dawned clear and beautiful. The wedding was to be held at the small church in Laredo, with Father Miguel officiating. Thomas arrived early, dressed in his best clothes, his hair neatly combed and his boots polished. Danny and Pete had ridden in with him, declaring themselves his groomsmen whether he wanted them or not. "A man should not get married without friends standing up with him," Pete said firmly. When Eleanor appeared at the back of the church on Carlos's arm, Thomas felt his breath catch. She was beautiful. The dress Maria had helped her make was simple white cotton, but it suited her perfectly. Her auburn hair was loose around her shoulders, held back from her face with ribbons. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers, and her smile outshone the sun streaming through the church windows. Carlos walked her down the aisle, and Thomas could see that the older man had tears in his eyes as he placed Eleanor's hand in Thomas's. "You take care of her," Carlos whispered. "She is like our daughter now." "I will," Thomas promised. "I swear it." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Father Miguel spoke about love and commitment, about 2 people becoming one flesh under God's blessing. Thomas and Eleanor exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to love and support each other through whatever life brought them. When Father Miguel pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed Eleanor with all the love in his heart. The small congregation erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration afterward at the cantina was joyous. Maria had prepared a feast, and the entire town seemed to turn out to wish the newlyweds well. There was music and dancing, and Thomas held Eleanor close as they swayed to a guitar player's gentle melody. "Happy," he murmured in her ear. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Eleanor said. "3 months ago I thought my life was over. I had lost everything and everyone. And now I have you. I have a husband who loves me and friends who care about me. I have a future again, Thomas. You gave me that." "You gave me something too," Thomas said. "Purpose. Before I met you, I was just drifting from job to job with no real direction. Now I have something to work for. Someone to come home to. You are my home, Eleanor." They danced and celebrated until the sun began to set. Finally, they said their goodbyes and rode together to the Dawson Ranch, Eleanor seated in front of Thomas on shadow, her head resting against his chest. The cabin Thomas had prepared awaited them, a lamp glowing in the window. Thomas helped Eleanor down from the horse, and then, in a gesture that made her laugh with delight, he swept her up in his arms and carried her across the threshold. "I believe that is good luck," he said, setting her down gently inside. Eleanor looked around the small cabin, taking in the clean, swept floors, the table set with wildflowers in a jar, the bed in the corner covered with a quilt that Pete had donated. "It is perfect," she said softly. "It is home." That night, as they lay together in their marriage bed, Eleanor traced patterns on Thomas's chest and said softly, "Do you remember when I asked you why you would give me your last dollar?" "I remember," Thomas said, running his fingers through her hair. "I do not think I ever really understood your answer," Eleanor said. "You said you were just helping someone who needed it, but it was more than that, was it not? You saw something in me worth helping, worth saving." "I saw someone worth knowing," Thomas said, "someone worth loving. And I was right." "I am glad you stopped that day," Eleanor whispered. "I am glad you gave me that dollar. I am glad for all of it, Thomas, every moment that led us here." "So am I," Thomas said, kissing her forehead. "So am I." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found each other when they both needed it most, beginning their life together with love and hope and the promise of better days ahead. The months that followed were not without challenges, but Thomas and Eleanor faced them together. The work at the Dawson Ranch was hard, but Thomas never complained. He was working for their future now, saving money and learning everything he could. Eleanor adapted to life on the ranch, helping the other ranch wives with cooking and mending. She had a natural way with people that made her popular, and soon she was an integral part of the small community. By October, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She told Thomas one evening as they sat on the small porch of their cabin, watching the sun set over the Texas landscape. "Are you sure?" Thomas asked, his voice full of wonder and a little fear. "I am sure," Eleanor said, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "Maria suspected weeks ago. She finally convinced me to see the doctor in town, and he confirmed it. We are going to have a baby, Thomas." Thomas pulled her close, his heart so full he thought it might burst. "A baby," he repeated, "our baby." "Are you happy?" Eleanor asked, searching his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Thomas said. "Terrified might be more accurate, but yes, incredibly happy." "You are going to be an amazing mother, Eleanor." "I hope so," Eleanor said softly. "I want to give our child everything I lost: security, love, a home that cannot be taken away." "We will," Thomas promised. "Together we will give our children everything they need." That winter was cold but happy. Eleanor's pregnancy progressed normally, and Thomas fussed over her constantly, much to her amusement and occasional exasperation. He took on extra work when he could, determined to save as much money as possible before the baby arrived. In March of 1879, During a warm spring night, Eleanor went into labor. Thomas rode frantically to fetch the doctor and Maria, who insisted on being there for the birth. The hours that followed were the longest of Thomas's life, pacing outside the cabin while Eleanor labored inside with Maria and the doctor attending her. Finally, as dawn broke over the ranch, Thomas heard the most beautiful sound he had ever experienced, his child's first cry. Maria emerged from the cabin, her face tired but beaming. "You have a son," she announced. "A healthy, strong boy, and Eleanor did wonderfully. She is asking for you." Thomas entered the cabin on shaky legs to find Eleanor propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears of joy streaming down her face. "Meet your son," she said softly. Thomas approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. Eleanor pulled back the blanket to reveal a tiny red face, eyes squeezed shut, perfect little fists waving in the air. Thomas felt tears prick his own eyes as he gently touched his son's soft cheek. "He is perfect," Thomas whispered. "You are amazing. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you for this gift." "What should we name him?" Eleanor asked. They had discussed names but never quite decided. Now, looking at his son, Thomas thought of his father who had taught him about honor and hard work and taking care of those you love. "What about Henry?" Thomas suggested. "Henry Whitfield." "After my father." Eleanor smiled. "Henry Whitfield. I love it. Welcome to the world, little Henry." As Thomas held his wife and son, he thought back to that day nearly a year ago when he had given his last dollar to a desperate stranger. That single act of kindness had changed his entire life. It had brought him love, family, and a future he never could have imagined. He had given Eleanor his last dollar, but she had given him so much more in return. She had given him a home, a purpose, and now a son to carry on after him. The years that followed were full and rich. Thomas continued to work at the Dawson Ranch, eventually becoming one of Jack Riley's most trusted hands. Eleanor raised Henry and, 3 years later, gave birth to a daughter they named Clara, after Eleanor's deceased aunt. 2 years after that came another son, Matthew. The small cabin was expanded with Thomas's own hands, adding rooms as their family grew. Eleanor planted a garden and learned to can vegetables for the winter. She sewed clothes for their children and became known throughout the ranch community for her generosity and warm hospitality. Carlos and Maria remained like family, visiting often and doting on the children. Maria taught Eleanor more recipes, and eventually Eleanor became such a good cook that she helped Maria at the cantina on special occasions, bringing the children along. Thomas never forgot that day in Laredo, the day he met Eleanor. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and he and Eleanor sat together on their porch, he would take her hand and marvel at how much had changed. "You ever regret it?" Eleanor asked him one such evening, years into their marriage. "Giving me that dollar. You could have had a hot meal that day instead of saving a stranger." Thomas looked at her, at the woman who had become the center of his world, the mother of his children, his partner in every way that mattered. "Not for a single second," he said honestly. "That dollar was the best investment I ever made. It bought me everything that matters in this life." "It bought me everything too," Eleanor said softly. "A second chance, a real home, a family, love. All because a kind cowboy gave his last dollar to a stranger and changed both our lives forever." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over the Texas sky. Two people who had found each other in a moment of shared need and built a lifetime of love from that foundation. By the time Thomas was 45 and Eleanor was 43, they had 5 children: Henry, Clara, Matthew, Sarah, and young Thomas Jr. The cabin had grown into a proper house, expanded and improved over the years with Thomas's skilled hands and the help of friends. Thomas had saved enough money to buy a small parcel of land adjacent to the Dawson Ranch, where he ran a few head of cattle of his own while still working for Jack Riley. Eleanor had fulfilled her dream of opening a small shop in Laredo, where she sold dresses and alterations alongside a young woman she had taken under her wing, teaching her the trade just as Maria had taught Eleanor. The shop was not grand, but it was successful and gave Eleanor a sense of pride and accomplishment beyond her roles as wife and mother. Their children grew strong and healthy, each with their own personality and dreams. Henry, the eldest, showed Thomas's skill with horses and his mother's determination. Clara had Eleanor's green eyes and a head for numbers that suggested she might be the first in the family to pursue formal education beyond the local school. Matthew was quiet and thoughtful, preferring books to ranching, which both parents encouraged. Sarah was fearless and adventurous, always getting into scrapes that kept Eleanor worried. And little Thomas Jr., at only 5 years old, showed signs of having inherited the best qualities of both his parents. Carlos and Maria had grown old, but remained vital parts of their lives. The cantina had been passed on to Carlos's nephew, but Maria still cooked there sometimes, and the old couple spent much of their time with Thomas and Eleanor's family, whom they considered their grandchildren in every way that mattered. One evening in the late spring of 1898, as Thomas and Eleanor celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary, they gathered their children around them at the dinner table. The house was full of noise and laughter, the table laden with food that Eleanor and Clara had prepared together. "Your mother and I want to tell you all a story," Thomas said as the meal wound down, "about how we met." The children, even the older ones who had heard versions of the tale before, leaned in eagerly. Thomas took Eleanor's hand and began to speak, telling them about a hot day in Laredo, a desperate woman outside a boarding house, and a decision that changed 2 lives forever. "Papa gave away his last dollar," young Sarah asked, her eyes wide. "But why?" "Because your mother needed help," Thomas said simply. "And when someone needs help and you can provide it, you do. That is how we live in this family. That is what I hope you will all remember and carry forward." "It was not just the dollar, though," Eleanor added, squeezing Thomas's hand. "It was everything that came after. Your father worked so I could eat. He offered me friendship when I was alone. He gave me love when I thought I would never trust anyone again. The dollar was just the beginning." Henry, now 19 and nearly a man himself, spoke up thoughtfully. "You both could have made easier choices. Papa, you could have kept that dollar. Mama, you could have accepted defeat and gone back to St. Louis. But instead, you chose each other and you chose to keep fighting. That is the real lesson, is it not?" Thomas felt pride swell in his chest at his son's wisdom. "That is exactly right, Henry. Life is full of choices, some easy and some hard. Your mother and I have tried to choose love, family, and doing what is right, even when it is difficult. That has made all the difference." After dinner, as the children dispersed to their evening activities, Thomas and Eleanor walked out to their porch, a habit they had maintained throughout their marriage. The Texas sky was putting on a show, the sunset painting everything in shades of gold and pink. 20 years, Eleanor mused, leaning against Thomas's shoulder. "It feels like both forever and no time at all." "I know what you mean," Thomas said, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Sometimes I still see that scared young woman outside the boarding house, and I cannot believe how far we have come." "I was so frightened that day," Eleanor admitted. "I truly believed I had reached the end, that there was no hope left for me. And then you appeared, like some kind of miracle I did not know I needed." "You saved me too," Thomas said. "I was just drifting before I met you, No real purpose beyond the next job, the next paycheck. You gave me a reason to build something lasting, to be better than I thought I could be." Eleanor turned in his arms to face him fully. Even at 43, with 20 years of hard work and 5 children behind her, she was still beautiful to him. Maybe more beautiful because of the life they had built together. The experiences etched in the fine lines around her eyes, and the strength in her bearing. "If I could go back to that day," Eleanor said, "knowing everything that would happen, every challenge we would face, every hard moment and every joy, I would not change a single thing. Meeting you was the greatest gift I have ever received." "The feeling is entirely mutual," Thomas said, kissing her softly. "Every day with you has been a blessing, Eleanor Whitfield, even the hard days, especially the hard days because we faced them together." They stood together on their porch, holding each other as the sun set and the stars began to emerge. Behind them, their house was full of light and laughter, the sounds of their children settling in for the evening. It was a life neither of them could have imagined that day in Laredo so many years ago. But it was theirs, built on a foundation of $1 and the courage to choose kindness over self-preservation. As the years continued to pass, Thomas and Eleanor grew old together, their love deepening with each passing season. They saw their children grow into adults, pursue their own dreams, and start families of their own. Henry took over the small ranch, expanding it with his natural talent for the work. Clara shocked everyone by becoming a teacher, one of the first women in the county to do so. Matthew became a lawyer, working in San Antonio but visiting often. Sarah married a rancher from a neighboring county and proved as fearless in motherhood as she had been as a child. Young Thomas Jr. followed his father's path, working as a skilled ranch hand before eventually joining his brother Henry in running the family ranch. Through it all, Thomas and Eleanor remained each other's greatest support. They celebrated triumphs together and weathered losses together. When Maria died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82, they mourned together, remembering the woman who had been so instrumental in bringing them together. Carlos followed his beloved wife only 6 months later, and Thomas and Eleanor made sure they were buried side by side, their graves overlooking the town of Laredo they had loved so well. As Thomas approached his 70th birthday, he began to slow down, his body bearing the effects of decades of hard physical labor. Eleanor, too, moved more carefully, her hands sometimes aching with arthritis, but they never complained. They had been blessed with more than either had dared to hope for that day they met. On a warm evening in May of 1923, 45 years after that fateful meeting, Thomas and Eleanor sat together on their porch, now surrounded by grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren running through the yard. The house and property had continued to grow over the decades, now a thriving ranch that employed several families and was known throughout the region for the quality of its cattle and horses. "Can you believe it has been 45 years?" Eleanor asked, her voice softer with age but still holding that warm quality Thomas had fallen in love with. "Some days I cannot," Thomas admitted. His hair was completely white now, his face deeply lined, but his eyes were still the same gentle blue that Eleanor had first seen all those years ago. "Other days, it feels like we have lived several lifetimes together." "I would not have wanted to live any of those lifetimes without you," Eleanor said, taking his weathered hand in hers. Their hands fit together perfectly, shaped by years of holding each other through joy and sorrow. Thomas looked out at the scene before them, their children, now middle-aged themselves, laughing and talking, their grandchildren playing and shouting with joy, the land they had built a life on stretching out as far as the eye could see. The sun setting in a blaze of orange and gold, painting everything with warm light. "You know what I think about sometimes," Thomas said thoughtfully. "That moment when you asked me why I would give you my last dollar. Do you remember what you said exactly?" Eleanor smiled, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday. "I said, 'Why would you do that for me?' I was so confused and overwhelmed. I could not understand why a stranger would help me when I had nothing to offer in return. And I said it was because you needed help," Thomas said. Which was true, but it was not the whole truth. Even then, in that first moment, I felt something. A connection. A sense that you were important somehow, that our meeting meant something. I did not understand it then, but I do now." "What do you understand?" Eleanor asked gently. "That sometimes God puts people in our path exactly when we need them," Thomas said. "I gave you my last dollar, but you gave me a reason to become the man I always wanted to be. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose. You gave me everything that matters, Eleanor. Everything that lasts." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "You gave me the same, my love. You saved my life that day in ways that went far beyond paying for a room. You showed me that there was still goodness in the world, still kindness, still hope. You taught me to trust again, to love again, to believe in a future again. Every good thing in my life traces back to you, and that choice you made to help a stranger." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands and watching their legacy play out before them. Eventually, Henry approached the porch, his own children trailing behind him. "Papa, Mama," he said with a grin. "The grandchildren want to hear the story again, about how you two met. Would you tell it?" Thomas looked at Eleanor, who nodded with a soft smile. "Gather everyone around," Thomas said. One more time. The family assembled on the porch and in the yard, young and old alike settling in to hear the familiar tale. In the golden light of the setting sun, Thomas began to speak, his voice still strong despite his years. He told them about a hot day in Laredo in 1878, about a desperate young woman and a cowboy with a silver dollar. He told them about kindness and courage, about taking chances and choosing hope over fear. Eleanor filled in details he forgot, and together they painted a picture of how a single moment of compassion had blossomed into a lifetime of love. As Thomas spoke, he looked around at all the faces listening so intently. Every single person there, every child and grandchild existed because of that day, because of that choice to give away his last dollar. What had seemed like a small thing at the time, perhaps even a foolish thing, had multiplied into more blessings than he could count. When the story was finished, young Thomas Jr.'s daughter, a precocious 8-year-old named Rose, asked the question that had started it all. "Great-grandpa, why would you do that? Why would you give away all your money for a stranger?" Thomas looked at Eleanor, who looked back at him with eyes full of love and understanding. They had been asked this question countless times over the decades, and the answer had evolved and deepened, but remained fundamentally the same. "Because, little Rose," Thomas said gently, "love is not something you find by looking for it. It is something you create by being the kind of person who deserves it. I gave your great-grandmother that dollar because she needed help, and helping people in need is always the right thing to do. I did not know then that she would become my wife, the mother of my children, my best friend and partner for 45 years. I just knew that if I walked away and did nothing, I would be less of a man than I wanted to be. And I whispered, why would you do that for me? Because I had forgotten that people could be truly kind without wanting something in return," Eleanor added. "Your great-grandfather reminded me that goodness still existed in the world. That was the real gift he gave me that day, more valuable than any dollar." As the evening deepened into night and the family gradually dispersed to their homes, Thomas and Eleanor remained on their porch. The stars came out, brilliant against the dark Texas sky, the same stars that had witnessed the beginning of their story so many years ago. "I am tired, my love," Thomas admitted quietly. He had been feeling his age more lately, the weight of 7 decades pressing on him. "I know," Eleanor said softly, "so am I." "But it has been a good life, has it not?" Thomas asked. "A very good life." "The best life," Eleanor confirmed. "More than I ever dreamed possible. You kept every promise you made to me, Thomas Whitfield. You gave me security, love, family, and a home that could never be taken away. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Thomas corrected gently. "That is how love works, Eleanor. It multiplies rather than divides. Every bit of love you gave me came back doubled, tripled. That is the magic of it." They sat together under the stars, two people who had weathered every storm and celebrated every joy that life had offered. They had started with nothing but a silver dollar and a moment of kindness, and they had built an empire of love that would last for generations. Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 months later, at the age of 70, with Eleanor holding his hand. She followed him exactly 1 year and 1 day after, dying quietly in the same bed they had shared for 45 years. The family said she died of a broken heart, unable to live without her beloved Thomas. The family never forgot the story of how Thomas and Eleanor met, passing it down through the generations as a reminder of the power of kindness, the importance of helping those in need, and the way that love could bloom in the most unexpected places. The dress shop Eleanor had owned in Laredo eventually closed, but the building was preserved by the Historical Society, a plaque mounted outside telling the story of Eleanor Vaughn Whitfield, who had come to Texas with nothing and built a legacy of love and generosity that touched countless lives. In the end, that single silver dollar, given freely and without expectation of return, had purchased more than anyone could have imagined. It had bought 2 lives worth living, a family that would span generations, and a love story that would be told and retold as long as there were Whitfields to remember where they came from. Thomas had asked Carlos once, in the early days, whether he believed in fate. He never came to a definitive answer to that question. But if fate existed, if some grand design guided people to where they needed to be, then that day in Laredo in May of 1878 was proof of it. 2 people, both at the lowest points in their lives, had found each other in a moment of shared need. One gave all he had to help a stranger. The other accepted that help and offered her whole heart in return. From that exchange, from that simple act of human kindness, had grown something beautiful and lasting. 5 children, 14 grandchildren, and by the time Eleanor died, 3 great-grandchildren with more on the way. A ranch that employed dozens of families. A legacy of generosity and love that rippled out through the community and beyond. All because a cowboy gave his last dollar to a stranger, and she whispered, "Why would you do that for me?" The answer to that question, discovered over 45 years of marriage and a lifetime of love, was both simple and profound. Because some people are worth everything you have to give, even when you do not know it yet. Because kindness matters. Because love, real love, starts not with what you can get but with what you are willing to give. And in the giving, both Thomas and Eleanor had received more than they ever could have imagined. They had received each other, and that had been enough to build a world on. Their story became the foundation upon which their entire family was built, a reminder that the best things in life often come from the moments when we choose to help others, even when it costs us something we cannot easily afford. Years after both Thomas and Eleanor had passed, Rose, the great-granddaughter who had asked why Thomas gave away his last dollar, grew up to become a writer. She wrote the full story of her great-grandparents, preserving it not just for the family but for anyone who needed to believe that love could conquer circumstances, that kindness mattered, and that sometimes giving away everything you have is the first step toward receiving everything you need. The book became a modest success, read throughout Texas and beyond, inspiring others with the simple truth that Thomas and Eleanor had lived, that the best investments we make are not in money or property, but in people, in kindness, in love freely given without expectation of return. And so the legacy continued, generation after generation, each one carrying forward the values that Thomas and Eleanor had embodied, each one remembering that everything they had, everything they were, traced back to a moment of compassion on a hot day in Laredo, Texas, when a cowboy with nothing gave everything to a stranger in need and found that he had given it to the love of his life. The end.